Audio check for the court reporter. Sound check. Sound check for the court reporter. Mic check. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sound check. 1, 2. Sound check for the court reporter. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sound check. 1, 2 for the court reporter. Mic check.
Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, 1, 2, 3.
26.
Good morning. The committee will come to order. This morning we meet to mark up a total of 12 bills, all of which have my full support. I'm grateful to the ranking member, to our subcommittee chairman and ranking members, and all of the sponsors of the bills on today's agenda for their efforts to advance these important pieces of legislation to the full committee. The Congressional Budget Office is still reviewing the bills on today's agenda, so we do not have final cost estimates, but I can assure you that any legislation that's advanced today will be fully offset or comply with all required protocols prior to any possible floor consideration. And since time is of the essence today, I'm going to ask unanimous consent that once we mark up the first 9 bills on the agenda, that we then consider the rest of the agenda en bloc. And before the en bloc vote, I will recognize any member who wishes to speak on any particular bill that's in en bloc. And since we do have a full agenda today, I'm going to forego any further opening comments and yield to the ranking member for any opening remarks she might have.
No opening remarks. I'm very excited about the fact that we have, I think, 12 bills, and many of it's very bipartisan, and so I support it. The only announcement I would like to make is today is Lee Footer's birthday, one of my staff members.
Well, happy birthday.
All right, I'll yield back the balance.
I now call up H.R. 5178. The clerk shall report.
H.R. 5178, to amend Title 38 United States Code to direct the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to provide educational and vocational counseling for veterans on campuses of institutions of higher learning and for other purposes.
The bill has been circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. The bill is now open to amendment at any point. Who would seek recognition for purposes of offering an amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 5178 at the desk.
The clerk shall report.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 5178, offered by Mr. Wenstrup of Ohio.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment in the nature of a substitute be dispensed with. Hearing no objection, so ordered. The gentleman is now recognized for 5 minutes to speak in support of his amendment in the nature of a substitute on H.R. 5178.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My ANS to H.R. 5178, the Veteran Success on Campus Act, includes the slightly modified text of Ms. Radewagen's bill, H.R. 5174, the Veterans Education Enhancement Act of 2016, and Mr. Takano's bill, H.R. 5175, the GI Bill Oversight Act of 2016. All 3 bills were favorably forwarded out of the Subcommittee on Economic Opportunity last week, and I'm proud to bring forth this ANS today. The base text of my ANS to H.R. 5178 would codify VA's Veteran Success on Campus program, a program which is already on 94 campuses nationwide and is an important asset and resource to a student veteran's educational success as they work towards earning their degree. As I said at the subcommittee markup, I believe it is vital that this program be codified in statute to ensure the future prosperity and continuity of the program, and I thank my colleagues, Mr. Takano and Ms. Rice, for being original co-sponsors on this provision. The text of Ms. Radewagen's bill, H.R. 5174, as amended, which is also included in my ANS, makes many positive changes to the GI Bill, including the change to current law to ensure that if a veteran takes a licensing or credentialing test or a national test, that their GI Bill eligibility only be charged at a prorated rate as opposed to a full month's entitlement for a single test. This provision would also improve the training of the individuals at institutions of higher learning who process GI Bill paperwork, as well as extend the VA Secretary's Advisory Committee on Education for 5 more years. Also, as part of Ms. Radewagen's subcommittee passed bill, my ANS includes a COLA round down for Montgomery GI Bill and Chapter 35 recipients. This is a common sense offset that will pay for all of the positive GI Bill enhancements included in this ANS and is something that has passed on a bipartisan basis out of this committee and this chamber in the past. Lastly, my ANS includes the text of my colleague, Mr. Takano's bill, H.R. 5175, which would require the VA Office of Inspector General to provide heightened scrutiny to any school where a final judgment or determination has been made by a state or federal entity that the school engaged in deceptive or deceiving marketing practices to attract students. Additionally, VA would be required to notify GI Bill recipients at these schools that this final judgment or determination has been made and counsel them on their transfer options as well as their remaining GI Bill eligibility. Well, at first I had some concerns with the intent of this bill's original language. I believe the compromise that my colleague and I have come to in consultation with VA OIG's feedback makes this a positive bill to move forward. My ANS provides common sense reforms and provisions that will bring about positive change for our active duty service members, veterans, and their families, and I urge its adoption. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Dr. Winstrup. Fine job, and I will be supporting your amendment in the nature of a substitute who seeks recognition for the purposes of offering an amendment. No. The clerk shall report.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 5178, offered by Mr. Takano of California.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment be dispensed with. On the amendment in the nature of a substitute, hearing no objections, so ordered, the gentleman is now recognized for 5 minutes to speak in support of his amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 5178 as amended.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. My amendment strikes Section 4 of the bill. This section requires that the annual increases in living stipends for Montgomery GI Bill recipients and survivors and dependents be rounded down to the next lower dollar amount. The principle here is what is important. The round down is not currently in effect, so this provision would affirmatively cut GI Bill benefits to pay for other veterans programs. Even if the round down amount does not appear to be much, I oppose using GI Bill cuts as a pay for on principle. I would hope that we could find another way to pay for the important pieces of legislation rolled up in H.R. 5178, including the Veteran Success on Campus Act and GI Bill Oversight Act, both of which I introduced. I'm willing to work with the majority to find other pay-fors that do not cut GI Bill benefits. I ask my colleagues to join me in supporting my amendment to oppose GI Bill benefit cuts. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Takano. I cannot support your amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute, so I would ask now if there's any discussion. Mr. Winstrup, you're recognized.
Well, I thank
Dr. Winstrup.
I thank Mr. Takano for his amendment, but this time I must oppose its adoption. And while I appreciate my colleagues' concerns about the inclusion of the COLA round down, this is a common sense way to pay for all the positive aspects of the bill that we are presented with today with the least amount of impact on veterans. In fact, this would result in the veteran receiving no more than a total of $12 less from their cost of living increase for any given year. So I must also remind my colleagues that this is the same offset that has been used in the past to pay for bipartisan bills, and in fact passed out of the House by voice vote last Congress to pay for the Ruth Moore Act. With this offset included, then this bill will not be able to move forward, as there's no way to pay for the enhancements being made to the GI Bill included in this package. I think it's a common sense approach that we are taking. And I urge all members to vote no on the amendment, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Dr. Winstrup. Any further discussion? Ms. Custer.
Thank you very much, and I just want to commend Dr. Winstrup for an excellent bill, and thank you to Mr. Takano. I think it's more a matter of principle from this side. We want to work with you, and I have a question about the pay for. I'm just not comfortable as a matter of principle of asking one group of veterans to pay for the benefits of another group of veterans. But I support the underlying bill and would love to work with the committee going forward on a better pay for. Thank you. I yield back.
Dr. Ruiz.
I also want to echo that, Dr. Winstrup, this is a great idea. I think that providing more of these benefits for our veterans are good. It's just it's hard to swallow to ask veterans to pay for their own benefits. So I'm going to have to oppose this on the principle that we're essentially asking veterans to pay for their own benefits out of their own pockets for where I think that should be the role that we take. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Members, I would remind you that this is not a new offset, that we have done this in the past before. These bills have passed on the floor, albeit with voice votes. There were no amendments that were passed, so this is not something new that this committee has come up with or this Congress. Since no other amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on the adoption of the amendment to the amendment in the nature of substitute offered by Mr. Takano. All those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. No. The noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I call for recorded vote.
Recorded vote has been requested. The clerk should call the roll.
On the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 5178 offered by Mr. Takano, Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman votes no. Mr. Lamborn? Mr. Lamborn votes no. Mr. Bilirakis? Dr. Rowe? Dr. Rowe votes no. Dr. Benishek? Dr. Benishek votes no. Mr. Huelskamp? Mr. Huelskamp votes no. Mr. Kaufman? Mr. Kaufman votes no. Dr. Wenstrup? Dr. Wenstrup votes no. Ms. Walorski? Ms. Walorski votes no. Dr. Abraham? Dr. Abraham votes no. Mr. Zeldin? Mr. Zeldin votes no. Mr. Costello? Mr. Costello votes no. Ms. Radewagen? Ms. Radewagen votes no. Mr. Bost? Mr. Bost votes no. Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Brown votes yes. Mr. Takano?
Yes.
Mr. Takano votes yes. Ms. Brownlee? Ms. Brownlee votes yes. Ms. Titus? Ms. Titus votes yes. Dr. Ruiz? Dr. Ruiz votes yes. Ms. Custer? Ms. Custer votes yes. Mr. O'Rourke? Mr. O'Rourke votes yes. Ms. Rice? Ms. Rice votes yes. Mr. Waltz? Mr. Waltz votes yes. Mr. McNerney? Mr. McNerney votes yes.
The clerk shall report.
Mr. Chairman, the vote is 11 yes, 13 noes.
So the amendment fails. The amendment in the nature of a substitute is not agreed to. Since no other amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Dr. Wenstrup. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 5178 is agreed to.
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Brown?
asking for a recording
Recorded
vote.
vote has been requested. The clerk shall call the roll.
On the ANS to H.R. 5178, Chairman Miller?
Aye.
Chairman Miller votes aye. Mr. Lamborn? Mr. Lamborn votes aye. Mr. Bilirakis? Dr. Rowe? Dr. Rowe votes aye. Dr. Benishek? Dr. Benishek votes aye. Mr. Huelskamp? Mr. Huelskamp votes aye. Mr. Kaufman? Mr. Kaufman votes aye. Dr. Wenstrup? Dr. Wenstrup votes aye. Ms. Walorski? Ms. Walorski votes aye. Dr. Abraham? Dr. Abraham votes aye. Mr. Zeldin? Mr. Zeldin votes aye. Mr. Costello? Mr. Costello votes yes. Ms. Radewagen? Ms. Radewagen votes aye. Mr. Bost? Mr. Bost votes aye. Ms. Brown?
No.
Ms. Brown votes no. Mr. Takano?
No.
Mr. Takano votes no. Ms. Brownlee? Ms. Brownlee votes no. Ms. Titus? Ms. Titus votes yes. Dr. Ruiz? Dr. Ruiz votes no. Ms. Custer? Ms. Custer votes no. Mr. O'Rourke? Mr. O'Rourke votes no. Ms. Rice? Ms. Rice votes no. Mr. Waltz? Mr. Waltz votes no. Mr. McNerney? Mr. McNerney votes no.
Clerk shall report.
I am. Mr. Chairman, the vote is 14 yes, 9 noes, 1 not voting.
The amendment in the nature of a substitute is agreed to. Is there any more discussion on the bill as amended? Since no other amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on the passage of H.R. 5178 as amended. All those in favor would say aye. 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 All opposed, no. The ayes have it. H.R. 5178 as amended is agreed to. I now recognize Mr. Lamborn for a motion to report H.R. 5178 as amended.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we favorably forward H.R. 5178 as amended to the full committee.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. H.R. 5178 as amended is reported favorably to the full House. I now call up H.R. 5229. The clerk shall report.
H.R. 5229, to direct the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to carry out a study to evaluate the effectiveness of programs, especially in regards to women veterans and minority veterans, in transitioning to civilian life and for other purposes.
The bill has been circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. The bill now is open to amendment at any point. Who seeks recognition for the purposes of offering an amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to H.R. 5229.
The clerk shall report.
Amendment to H.R. 5229 offered by Mr. Takano of California.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment be dispensed with. Hearing no objection, so ordered. The gentleman is now recognized for 5 minutes to speak in support of his amendment to H.R. 5229.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 5229 requires VA, the Department of Labor, and the Department of Defense to study the effectiveness of veterans transition programs for women, veterans, and other minority groups. We want to learn how we can differentiate transition programming for minority veterans in order to meet their unique needs and overcome barriers to employment. My amendment simply rectifies an oversight in the drafting of the bill language. It specifies the specific groups of veterans the VA must include in its study: women veterans, veterans with disabilities, Native American veterans, insular veterans, and other groups as determined by the secretaries. I am pleased to have worked with Representative Radewagen in a bipartisan fashion and believe this amendment will ensure the best outcome for veterans in this study. I ask you to support the amendment, and thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Takano. I, in fact, will be supporting this amendment, and I would ask, are there any other members that wish to comment on Mr. Takano's amendment? Since no other amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on the adoption of the amendment offered by Mr. Takano. All those in favor would say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is to H.R. 5229 is agreed to. Is there any more discussion on the bill as amended? Since no other amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on the passage of H.R. 5229 as amended. All those in favor would say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. H.R. 5229 as amended is agreed to, and I now recognize the ranking member, Ms. Brown, for a motion to report H.R. 5229 as amended.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 5229 as amended be reported favorably to the House of Representatives.
All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. H.R. 5229 as amended is reported favorably to the full House. I now call up H.R. 4138. The clerk shall report.
H.R. 4138, to authorize the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to recoup relocation expenses paid to or on behalf of employees of the Department of Veterans Affairs.
The bill's been circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules, and without objection, first reading is dispensed with. Members, before calling up any amendments that have been filed, I would like to speak briefly on the purpose of this piece of legislation. It would, in fact, provide the Secretary the express authority to recoup any relocation incentives provided to a VA employee. The bill would require the Secretary to set up, through regulation, when they will deem it appropriate to recoup any relocation incentives, and would afford the employee notice of the Secretary's decision to recoup the money and the opportunity to a hearing to a third-party federal entity prior to having to repay any part of the money. We have asked the Department time and time again to show us that the Secretary does in fact have the explicit authority, and their answers have been incomplete and unclear. When cases like those involving Ms. Rubens and Ms. Graves come to light, the Secretary must have the clear and unwavering authority to recoup any taxpayer-funded relocation expenses that were provided to the employee due to the employee's own ill-gotten means. Finally, I would note that this language is directly based off of the process set up by H.R. 280, a bill that would give the Secretary the authority to recoup bonuses from VA employees when it is deemed appropriate. I want to remind members that H.R. 280 passed both this committee and the full House earlier this Congress unanimously by voice vote without amendments or any of the objections that I've begun to hear today. The bill is now open to amendment at any time, and I would ask who seeks recognition for the purposes of offering an amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to
The
H.R.
clerk
4138.
shall report Ms. Rice's amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 4138, offered by Ms. Rice of New York.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment be dispensed with, and hearing no objection, so ordered. The gentlelady is now recognized for 5 minutes in support of her amendment to H.R. 4138.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I said last week during our subcommittee markup, I fully support the idea behind H.R. 4138, and I want to vote for it because nothing infuriates me more than the lack of accountability within the VA. But just as it was a week ago, the language in this bill is entirely too vague. In its current form, the language suggests that the Secretary would have the authority to recoup travel expenses from anyone he or she wants for any reason, and frankly, I'm surprised that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would give the VA such a broad and poorly defined power. I want to vote for a bill that will actually do what we say it will and ensure that VA officials who commit fraud or abuse will be held fully accountable for their actions. That's why I'm offering this amendment. It's clear and simple, barely more than a page. First and foremost, it makes it explicit that the Secretary has the authority to recoup travel expenses from an employee who's committed an act of fraud, abuse, or malfeasance. Without that explicit language, this authority could be abused now or in the future, and officials who commit that kind of wrongdoing may never be held fully accountable. This amendment would also establish a fair and transparent appeals process through the Merit Systems Protection Board or the federal court system. And for a final measure of accountability, it requires the VA to report to Congress each year about the use of relocation expenses. In short, my amendment will help ensure that this recoupment authority is actually used to hold VA officials fully accountable for wrongdoing, not used to retaliate against whistleblowers or abused in any other way. I urge my colleagues to give it their full support. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rice. And I will say that while I appreciate the spirit in which your amendment is offered, I have to oppose it at this time. And I would say that I support the provision of your proposal to explicitly articulate to the Secretary may only recoup those relocation expenses if the employee has been found to have committed an act of fraud, abuse, or malfeasance. I do, however, have concerns, and I think we've expressed them to you, that the additional review process of the Secretary's decision that your amendment would be set up is a burdensome process, and what I believe unnecessary, and just adds another layer of time and really inefficiency. And as I said earlier, changing the review process in this bill would be inconsistent with past legislation that this committee and the House have already spoken on in this Congress. It would be confusing and be complicated to have one set of rules for bonus recoupment and then another set of rules for relocation recoupment. And we need to streamline these types of processes, not lengthen them and complicate them. And I'm willing to work with the gentlelady to try to come to an agreement on this before we take the bill to the floor. But as I said, at this time, I have to oppose the amendment. I would ask if there's any more discussion on the amendment. Mr. Takano.
Well, I would like to strongly support Representative Rice's amendment to H.R. 4138. Like Congresswoman Rice, I support the goal of allowing the VA to recoup relocation expenses that employees received after committing acts of fraud or abuse. And I imagine all members on our side support that outcome. But to prohibit either the employee or the VA from appealing the revocation decision is misguided and reflexive. The right to an appeal serves to protect the employee from retaliation or bad management while ensuring the VA can recoup fraudulently obtained payments if they lose the initial case. I want to remind this committee that it was subordinate employees in the VA who stepped forward in the face of bad management that allowed bad actions to be revealed. We don't want to create a more intimidating environment. And taking away due process rights has that effect of empowering managers even more. What's more, without the right to appeal, this policy violates the constitutional principles of due process and the prohibition against takings without just compensation. Congresswoman Rice's amendment would also improve the underlying bill by allowing the reviewing body to modify the initial decision, which fixes a problem we saw when the MSPB was forced to overturn SES demotion decisions that went too far. I'm disappointed that we are not able to reach a bipartisan compromise at this time. I do hope that further discussions will allow us to reach a compromise. I urge support for Representative Rice's amendment and opposition to the underlying bill. Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Takano. I would direct your attention to line 19 of the bill, and it talks about before such repayment, the employee is afforded notice and an opportunity for a hearing conducted by another department or agency of the federal government, a review and appeal at that point. Ms. Custer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I join Mr. Takano in supporting Ms. Rice's amendment, but I do want to say that I appreciate your comments from the chair that you agree with this language that on recouping bonuses for fraud, abuse, and malfeasance. And I join Mr. Takano in hoping that we can work together to come up with a final version that everyone can come to the table on. But I intend to support the Rice amendment. Thank you. I yield back.
Any other comments, members? If not, no other amendments were timely filed. The question now occurs on the adoption of the amendment offered by Ms. Rice. All those in favor will say aye. All those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the nays have it. The amendment to H.R. 4138 is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Can we have a roll call vote,
A
please?
recorded vote has been requested. The clerk shall call the roll.
First, Mr. Chairman, clarification on the roll call vote on the amendment to the ANS to H.R. 5178 offered by Mr. Takano. It was 10 yes, 13 noes, 1 non-voting. The amendment still failed. Just wanted to make the clarification.
Clerk will call the roll.
On the amendment to H.R. 4138 offered by Ms. Rice of New York, Chairman Miller?
No.
Chairman Miller votes no. Mr. Lamborn? Mr. Lamborn votes no. Mr. Bilirakis? Dr. Rowe? Dr. Rowe votes no. Dr. Benishek? Dr. Benishek votes no. Mr. Huelskamp? Mr. Huelskamp votes no. Mr. Kaufman? Mr. Kaufman votes no. Dr. Wenstrup? Dr. Wenstrup votes no. Ms. Walorski? Ms. Walorski votes no. Dr. Abraham? Dr. Abraham votes no. Mr. Zeldin? Mr. Zeldin votes no. Mr. Costello? Mr. Costello votes no. Ms. Radewagen? Ms. Radewagen votes no. Mr. Boss? Mr. Boss votes no. Ms. Brown? Ms. Brown votes yes. Mr. Takano? Mr. Takano votes yes. Ms. Brownlee? Ms. Brownlee votes yes. Ms. Titus? Ms. Titus votes yes. Dr. Ruiz? Dr. Ruiz votes yes. Ms. Custer? Ms. Custer votes yes. Mr. O'Rourke? Mr. O'Rourke votes yes. Ms. Rice? Ms. Rice votes yes. Mr. Walsh? Mr. Walsh votes yes. Mr. McNerney?
Clerk shall report.
Mr. Chairman, the vote is 9 yes, 13 noes, 2 non-voting.
So the amendment is not agreed to. Do any other members wish to comment on the bill? Since no amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on the passage of H.R. 4138. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. H.R. 4138 is agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, a recorded vote.
Do you want to record a vote?
Yes.
Okay. Clerk shall call the roll.
On passage of H.R. 4138. Chairman Miller.
Aye.
Chairman Miller votes aye. Mr. Lamborn? Mr. Lamborn votes aye. Mr. Bilirakis? Dr. Rowe? Dr. Rowe votes aye. Dr. Benishek? Dr. Benishek votes aye. Mr. Huelskamp? Mr. Huelskamp votes aye. Mr. Kaufman? Mr. Kaufman votes aye. Dr. Wenstrup? Dr. Wenstrup votes aye. Ms. Walorski? Ms. Walorski votes aye. Dr. Abraham? Dr. Abraham votes aye. Mr. Zeldin? Mr. Zeldin votes aye. Mr. Costello? Mr. Costello votes yes. Ms. Radewagen? Ms. Radewagen votes aye. Mr. Boss? Mr. Boss votes yes. Ms. Brown? Ms. Brown votes no. Mr. Takano? Mr. Takano votes no. Ms. Brownlee? Ms. Brownlee votes yes. Ms. Titus? Ms. Titus votes no. Dr. Ruiz? Dr. Ruiz votes no. Ms. Custer? Ms. Custer votes yes. Mr. O'Rourke? Mr. O'Rourke votes yes. Ms. Rice? Ms. Rice votes yes. Mr. Waltz? Mr. Waltz votes yes. Mr. McNerney?
Clerk shall report.
Mr. Chairman, the vote is 18 yeas and 4 noes, 2 non-voting.
So the amendment in the nature of a substitute is agreed to. I now recognize Mr. Lamborn for a motion on reporting 4138.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we favorably forward H.R. 4138 to the full committee.
All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. H.R. 4138 is reported favorably to the full House. I now call up H.R. 3286 as amended. The clerk shall report.
H.R. 3286 as amended, to encourage effective voluntary private sector investments to recruit, employ, and retain men and women who have served in the United States military with
The
annual...
bill was circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with, and the bill is now open for amendment at any point. I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute at the desk, and the clerk shall report.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3286, offered by Chairman Miller of Florida.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment in the nature of a substitute be dispensed with. Hearing no objection, so ordered. I recognize myself for 5 minutes to speak in support of my amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3286 as amended. I would say members in the nature of a substitute would keep the base text of the bill, which would authorize the Department of Labor to create the Hire Vets Medallion Program. This program would properly recognize companies and businesses that hire and retain veterans and are involved in their local communities. The only change that this amendment would make is to provide a small discretionary offset by capping bonuses for VA SES employees for 1 year. This is a bipartisan and non-controversial offset that we have used in the past. Once the Hire Vets Medallion Program begins, the application fees themselves that are authorized by this bill would defray any new cost to the general federal government, but the offset is needed for the first year costs of setting up the program. I would ask if any other members wish to comment on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. Since no amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of substitute to H.R. 3286 is agreed to. Is there any more discussion on the bill as amended? And again, since no other amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on the passage of H.R. 3286 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. The ayes have it. H.R. 3286 as amended is agreed to, and I now recognize the ranking member, Ms. Brown, for a motion on reporting H.R. 3286 as amended.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 3286 as amended be reported favorably to the House of Representatives.
All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. H.R. 3286 as amended is reported favorably to the full House. I now call up H.R. 3471 as amended, and the clerk shall report.
H.R. 3471 to amend Title 38 United States Code to make certain improvements in the provisions of automobiles and adaptive equipment by the Department of Veterans
The
Affairs.
bill was circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules without objection. The first reading is dispensed with. The bill is now open to amendment at any point. Who seeks recognition for the purpose of offering an amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
The
at the
clerk
desk.
shall report.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3471, offered by Ms. Wolarski.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment in the nature of a substitute be dispensed with. Hearing no objection, so ordered. The gentlelady is now recognized for 5 minutes to speak in support of her amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3471 as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3471, and I want to thank Representatives Brownlee and Dr. Ruiz for their help. This ANS includes 2 veteran-centric measures that will improve care and quality for automobile adaptive equipment and hearing aids supplied to disabled veterans. Automotive mobility plays a vital part in helping our disabled veterans live a normal life after being wounded on the battlefield. The VA's Automobile Adaptive Equipment, or AAE program, provides eligible disabled veterans with an automobile or modification, such as a wheelchair lift and reduced effort steering and braking, to existing vehicles to improve their quality of life. However, due to an outdated handbook that was last updated in 2000, VISNs have operated based on their own interpretations of VA procedures, which has resulted in some cases of VISNs using inferior providers and improperly installed equipment for veterans, causing serious safety issues for both them and the driving public. Currently, VA does not require any type of quality standards for providers to participate in the AAE program. My legislation requires VA to update its outdated policy on adaptive equipment by requiring them to develop a comprehensive policy regarding quality standards for providers that participate in the program. The development of this policy will be done in close consultation with a host of stakeholders, including VSOs, the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, and industry representatives. VA and stakeholders will be tasked with developing a veteran-centric policy to ensure safe, quality equipment through the AAE program. In addition, this legislation reduces undue burdens on businesses who are already certified under standards imposed by either a manufacturer or third-party organization if those standards meet or exceed the ones that would be developed by the VA. If a business is already proven to be offering safe services, this prevents an unnecessary requirement of having to earn multiple certifications. Lastly, it would require the VA to update the AAE program handbook to reflect the new policy and along with biannual reports on implementation and compliance. This ANS also includes a bill by Congressman Duffy that would allow the VA to utilize hearing aid specialists to fill the needs for certain hearing aid services. Over the past 4 years, hearing loss and tinnitus have been the 2 most prevalent service-connected disabilities for veterans. Right now, the VA only uses audiologists to provide hearing services to veterans. This bill allows the VA to also use hearing aid specialists who are more available and just as qualified to fit, program, adjust, and repair hearing aids. This simple fix will decrease the audiologist's workload and allow them to instead focus on special cases and complex conditions while also decreasing the wait time for a veteran that just needs a quick tweak to their hearing aid. I urge my colleagues to support these common sense provisions and look forward to working with the members of this committee, the VSOs, in further addressing critical needs for the disabled veterans. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wolarski. I will be supporting this amendment in the nature of a substitute and would also ask if there's any other member who wishes to offer an amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3471 as amended at the desk.
The clerk shall report.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3471, offered by Mr. Beneshek of Michigan.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute be dispensed with. Hearing no objections, so ordered. The gentleman is now recognized for 5 minutes to speak in support of his amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3471 as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say a few things about the amendment. First, I want to thank Congressman Duffy for his leadership on this legislation and his commitment to working with us to improve access to hearing health services at the VA. As Ms. Wolarski said, it's one of the most common disabilities that our veterans return with. I want to recognize all the groups that have contributed to this robust process, and while I understand there's still some disagreement over certain provisions in the ANS, I'm confident that we all support the goal of ensuring our veterans have better access to hearing services and that they're receiving care from an appropriate provider based on that individual veteran's specific needs. I am encouraged that this compromise achieves that balance and meets that goal. My amendment makes a technical tweak to the ANS, in other words, removing the reference to the handbook while retaining the key provisions we've added in the past. Overall, we will ensure that the services provided by a hearing aid technician are appropriate to their state license. Veterans will continue to have access to the full range of professional services offered by an audiologist, and veterans will have the appropriate access to medical care offered by ear, nose, and throat specialists. All of these providers play a vital and necessary role in caring for our veterans and meeting their individual needs. Our veterans deserve the very best care, and I believe this bill will give the VA the tools that provide that. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I will be supporting your amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute. I'm going to ask if there is any other discussion on Dr. Benishek's amendment. Since no other amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on the adoption of the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Dr. Benishek. All those in favor will say aye. 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 All those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. The amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3471 as amended is agreed to. Is there any other additional discussion on the amendment to the nature of a substitute as amended? Again, since no other amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended offered by Ms. Walorski. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended to H.R. 3471 as amended is agreed to. Any more discussion on the bill as amended? Since no other amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on the passage of H.R. 3471 as amended. All those in favor would say aye. 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 All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. H.R. 3471 as amended is agreed to. And I now recognize the ranking member, Ms. Brown, for a motion on reporting H.R. 3471 as amended.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 3471 as amended be reported favorably to the House of Representatives.
All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. H.R. 3471 as amended is reported favorably to the full House. I now call up H.R. 3974 as amended, and the clerk shall report.
H.R. 3974 to require the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to carry out a pilot program to provide educational assistance to certain former members of the Armed Forces for education and training as physician assistants of the Department of Veterans Affairs.
The bill was circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. The bill is open to amendment at any point. Who seeks recognition for the purposes of offering an amendment? Ms. Custer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk shall report.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3974 offered by Ms. Custer of New Hampshire.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment in the nature of a substitute be dispensed with. Hearing no objection, so ordered. The gentlelady is now recognized for 5 minutes to speak in support of her amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3974 as amended.
Thank you, Chairman Miller and the committee for taking this bill up today. The Grow Our Own Directive, Physician Assistant Employment and Education Act of 2015, will allow us to merge our efforts at improving veteran access to health care and creating opportunities for veteran education and employment. In order to reduce costs and ensure the best chances that this program can be realized, I have previously introduced this amendment in the nature of a substitute that narrows the focus of the bill to the scholarship pilot program and its related administrative positions. Today's ANS further focuses this bill by removing language requiring the VA to find $8 million in already appropriated dollars to support the program. In a time of shortages for primary care providers, both in the private sector and in the VA, and with the Office of Inspector General listing physician assistants as one of the VA's top 5 occupations with the largest staffing shortages, creating a pathway for opportunity for our veterans to fill that gap and continue to serve their country is an excellent opportunity. Thank you again to the committee for considering this legislation today. I encourage all of my colleagues to support sending this bill to the House floor, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Custer. I will be supporting the amendment in the nature of a substitute. Would I ask if any other members wish to comment? Dr. Rowe.
Just a question administratively. Did we remove that administrative? I think we talked about that, this administrative person. We don't need to add any more administrators in the VA to look over this one small program.
I know that our staffs have been in communication And my understanding was that your staff was okay with it.
Okay, and just to be sure that we don't need, I mean, I want to support this, and we talked about this, but to have another staff person, the VA, adding another staff person to oversee, they could easily oversee this program with current people.
If the gentleman would yield,
Yes.
staff's prepared to answer the question.
Oh, good.
Sir, the language resources staff out of existing staff at the VA. It doesn't add any new positions.
Thank you very much. Again, I will be supporting the amendment in the nature of a substitute. I would ask if there are any more comments or questions.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Huelskamp.
I do have a question on the provision in this section that deals with where these individuals would be placed. Do we have a list of the states with a per capita population more than 9%?
I know it includes New Hampshire and Vermont.
That's what I was figuring. I was guessing that.
I can certainly get that to you, but it typically rural areas. I was actually just in the Agriculture Committee. We were having this discussion. 45% of our country's veterans live in rural communities. So I'm happy to get the full list, but I know New Hampshire and Vermont are in the 14 to 15%. So if you think of rural communities like that.
Yeah, rural communities in states that with the 9%. So you got to meet both of those requirements, correct, in order to have these individuals. Yeah, I'd like to see that list. I'm curious where they will end up.
That's the priority, to make sure we focus on areas with most need, but I'd be more than happy to get you the list and make sure that the areas you're concerned about are included.
Okay. Appreciate that. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you
Chairman.
very much.
I believe what she was trying to say is that it will, all states that do not begin with a K. Since no other amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Ms. Custer. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3974 as amended is agreed to. Any more discussion on the bill as amended? Since no other amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on the passage of H.R. 3974 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it. H.R. 3974 as amended is agreed to, and I now recognize the ranking member, Ms. Brown, for a motion on reporting H.R. 3974 as amended.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 3974 as amended be reported favorably to the House of Representatives.
All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. H.R. 3974 as amended is reported favorably to the full House. I now call up H.R. 3956, and the clerk shall report.
H.R. 3956, to direct the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to develop and implement a plan to hire directors of the medical centers of the Department of Veterans Affairs.
The bill has been circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules without objection. The first reading is dispensed with. The bill is now open to amendment at any point. Who seeks recognition for the purpose of offering amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute at the desk.
The clerk shall report.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3956, offered by Mr. Bost.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment in the nature of a substitute be dispensed with. Hearing no objection, so ordered. The gentleman is now recognized for 5 minutes to speak in support of his amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3956.
Thank you, Chairman Miller and Ranking Member Brown. I appreciate the opportunity to offer this amendment. I believe it helps build on the work the committee has done to reform the Department of Veterans Affairs and ensure access to quality health care our veterans deserve. As a Marine and a father of a Marine, I recognize the sacrifices that so many Americans have made in defense of our freedom. There's no doubt that we must fight for the brave men and women who have fought for us. I know my colleagues on both sides of the aisle feel this way. Like individual military units, the facilities of the Department of Veterans Affairs need steady leadership and long-term vision to ensure success. No organization can operate under a revolving door of interim leaderships, and certainly not one with the task with caring for our American heroes. Yet there is a revolving door at the VA medical centers across this country. This undermines the quality and the speed of care. That's unacceptable. That is why I introduced House Resolution 3956, the VA Health Care Center Management Stability and Improvement Act. This bipartisan legislation requires the VA Secretary to create a plan for hiring a permanent and qualified director at every VA medical center. This issue first came to my attention in my own backyard. Many Southern Illinois veterans receiving treatment through St. Louis VA Medical Center. The St. Louis VA Medical Center provides health care to over 45,000 veterans annually, all under a cloud of temporary leadership. Over the last several years, the St. Louis VA has been managed by more than 7 different acting directors. After I began looking into the local issue at the St. Louis VA Medical Center, it came to my attention that this is a problem, isn't just a problem in that area. Upon further investigation, I found that dozens of VA medical centers have lacked a permanent director for quite some time. According to the VA Health Undersecretary Shulkin, before the committee, there was currently 34 VA MCs without a permanent director. This problem is due to OPM requirements which stipulate that a temporary director can serve for no more than 120 days with a 240-day maximum total if their tenure is extended. The lack of stable, permanent leadership is no doubt one of the reasons the Department of Veterans Affairs has struggled to provide appropriate health care to those it serves. House resolution seeks to fix the problem and fix it now. Specifically, it requires the VA Secretary to report the status of any unfilled vacancy to the House and Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, identify possible issues leading to the lack of staffing for these unfilled permanent director vacancies, access the possibility of promotion and training qualified candidates from within the VA for promotion to these leadership positions, develop a plan to hire highly qualified medical directors for each VA medical center which lacks a permanent director. Submit this plan to Congress within 120 days of enactment of the bill. My amendment is intended to help improve leadership at the VA medical centers, and so many of our nation's veterans rely on it. In addition, the amendment in the nature of a substitute is cooperative legislation sponsored by incorporates legislation sponsored by our colleague Representative Wolarski. Her legislation seeks to ensure that each VA MC director annually certifies and reports their compliance regarding the scheduling of appointments for VA medical services. Improving access to care has been a high priority of this committee, and the amendment helps ensure the accountability for results. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to offer this amendment and yield back my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bost. I will be supporting this amendment in the nature of a substitute and would ask if any other members wish to comment on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. Since no other amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Mr. Bost. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3956 is agreed to, and would ask if there any more discussion on the bill as it is amended. Since no other amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on the passage of H.R. 3956 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. The ayes have it. H.R. 3956 as amended is agreed to. I now recognize the ranking member, Ms. Brown, for a motion in supporting or reporting H.R. 3956 as amended.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 3956 as amended be reported favorably to the House of Representatives.
All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. H.R. 3956 as amended is reported favorably to the full House. I now call up H.R. 4782. The clerk shall report.
H.R. 4782, to increase, effective as December 1, 2016, the rates of compensation for veterans with service-connected disabilities and the rates of dependency and indemnity compensation for the survivors of certain disabled veterans and for other purposes.
The bill has been circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. The bill is open for amendment at any point. Who seeks recognition for the purposes of offering amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
The clerk shall report.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4782, offered by Dr. Abraham.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment in the nature of a substitute be dispensed with. Hearing no objection, so ordered. The gentleman is now recognized for 5 minutes to speak in support of his amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4782.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 4782, which I introduced along with Ms. Titus, would help safeguard the financial future of veterans and their families by ensuring veterans' benefits keep pace with inflation. My bill would ensure that veterans would receive the same cost of living adjustment as Social Security beneficiaries do. This bill will help ensure that veterans will continue to be able to put food on the table and pay for housing and other necessities. The amendment in the nature of a substitute incorporates a bill introduced by Congressman Costello, which creates a pilot program. This pilot program would establish special events in which VA employees would meet one-on-one with veterans to answer their questions and help expedite their claims. Additionally, the amendment in the nature of a substitute includes 3 bills authored by Chairman Miller, which would help ensure that our fallen warriors receive the honor and recognition they have earned. One of these proposals would authorize VA to pay the cost of transporting the remains of deceased veterans to state or tribal veteran cemeteries. Current law only allows the VA to pay to transport deceased veterans to national cemeteries. Another bill offered by Chairman Miller and incorporated into the amendment in the nature of a substitute would authorize the VA to provide the Presidential Memorial Certificate to deceased members of the Reserve or the Reserve Officers Training Corps who are eligible to be buried in a national cemetery. And finally, the amendment in the nature of a substitute includes Chairman Miller's legislation to authorize the VA to furnish special headstones or medallions for the grave sites of those who were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor and who are buried in a private cemetery. The men and women who earn the Congressional Medal of Honor are among our nation's most respected members of the armed services. This amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4782 would ensure that the final resting place of these courageous individuals are appropriately marked. I urge all members to support the amendment in the nature of a substitute, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abraham. As you might imagine, I will be supporting this amendment in the nature of a substitute. Would I ask if there's any other member that wishes to offer an amendment?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Brown.
I have an amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4782.
The clerk shall report.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4782, offered by Ms. Brown of Florida.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute be dispensed with. Hearing no objection, so ordered. The gentlelady is now recognized for 5 minutes to speak in support of her amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4782.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, there are many fine provisions in this bill, but at the end of the day, I simply cannot support cutting the checks of veterans to pay for these provisions. Round down, the cost of living adjustment for veterans was first instituted to enable this committee more than 20 years ago to meet cost-cutting instructional mandates under budget reconciliation. As the VFW has stated, this is nothing more than a money-saving device that comes at the expense of veterans and their survivors. This practice continued until 2013. Since 2013, veterans have been able to receive the full amount of their annual increase. I do not believe that we should cut benefits for our veterans in order to pay for other benefits for other veterans. If we believe that these benefits are important, we should, as a nation, pay for them. Benefits for our veterans are a cost of the war. Let me repeat that. Benefits for our veterans are the cost of going to war, and we should all meet this responsibility. We all end up using the same offsets and the same gimmicks. We cut bonuses in practice every bill we consider. We do so again today. We should all agree that we should stop these budget gimmicks for the sake of our veterans. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment and ensure that we do not cut the benefits of our veterans. Thank you, and I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. I will not be supporting this amendment to the amendment in the nature of substitute, and would ask if there's any further discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I seek recognition.
Dr. Abraham, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm opposed to the gentlelady's amendment. I note that Mrs. Brown had supported the COLA round down in the past. Just last year, the gentlelady supported 2 of my bills that included the COLA round down. The gentlelady was present when H.R. 675 passed this committee with the round down by a voice vote on May 5th 2015. The gentlelady voted for this bill when it passed the House by a vote of 409 to 0 on July 28th of last year. H.R. 677, which also included the round-down provision, was approved by this committee by voice vote on September 17, 2015. The gentlelady did not raise any objections when H.R. 677 passed the House under suspension of the rules on February 9, 2016. The round-down has been used by both parties to help pay for veterans programs for more than 20 years, and I urge my colleagues to reject the gentlelady's amendment, and I yield back.
On the amendment, Mr. Chairman?
Ms. Brown.
Mr. Chairman, I think the question is not whether or not we expect these bills to go through the process and whether we're going to get them signed into law, or are we trying to make a statement? Now, those bills that I voted for, dead on arrival, didn't go anywhere. I am hoping that as we move forward, in a bipartisan manner so that we can get these bills signed into law, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, and I would bring to the members' attention that in the President's current budget request, he requested a COLA round-down. Who seeks recognition for the purposes of offering an amendment? Ms. Brownlee.
Mr. Chairman, my amendment to H.R. 4782 would ensure that veterans can access the care and service.
The clerk shall report.
An amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4782 offered by Ms. Brownlee of California.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute be dispensed with. Hearing no objection, so ordered. The gentlelady is now recognized for 5 minutes to speak in support of her amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4782 as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment to H.R. 4782 would ensure that veterans can access the care and services they need at VA's network of 13 inpatient specialty rehabilitation centers. As you know, under current law, the VA covers travel costs for all veterans requiring medical care for service-connected injuries. However, VA does not provide travel reimbursement for non-service-connected care. I understand the history of this distinction between service-connected and non-service-connected care. However, I believe we should consider a very narrow exception and cover the costs of travel to specialty rehabilitation clinics for the blinded and catastrophically disabled veterans. Many members of the committee have met with Blinded Veterans Association and Paralyzed Veterans of America. We have heard about blinded and catastrophically disabled veterans who need specialty rehabilitation services but cannot afford the cost of the plane ticket. The sad reality is that if a veteran can get to the specialty rehab center, the veteran is absolutely eligible for that care. But because many blinded and catastrophically disabled veterans are unemployed or living on a limited fixed income, the veterans simply can't afford the cost of travel to get to these clinics. My bill has not been before the committee. That is why I'm offering it as an amendment today. My amendment does not cost very much, but it would mean the world to aging veterans who lose their eyesight and need to learn the skills necessary to be independent and stay in their own home. It would help these blinded veterans learn to cook, to clean, to do laundry, and live in an independent life without their eyesight. My amendment would also help veterans who have been involved in severe accidents like a motorcycle crash resulting in catastrophic disability, who need to relearn how to perform basic tasks, again, to live independently, like taking a shower and simply getting dressed. Far too often, blinded and catastrophically disabled veterans forego the life-changing care that they are entitled to simply because they can't afford the cost of the trip. In fact, BVA estimates that even though specialized rehab centers have long wait lists, as many as 1 in 4 beds are empty because veterans who need the care cannot afford the travel expenses. Without access to rehab centers, veterans face higher medical costs, reoccurring hospitalizations, and a loss of independence and quality of life. My amendment would extend travel reimbursements to veterans with low vision and legal blindness, a spinal cord injury or disorder, or double or multiple amputations. It is supported by both PVA and BVA. Mr. Chairman, Congress is already funding these rehabilitation centers. There's only 13 across our nation. We should ensure that veterans with the greatest need can fly to those facilities, to travel to those facilities, to get the access that they need. And I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brownlee. I will be opposing your amendment on the grounds that it will create a disparate travel eligibility for certain veterans with non-service connected conditions on the basis of their injury. During consideration of similar language at a subcommittee on health legislative hearing last Congress, both DAV and VA expressed concerns about the fundamental unfairness inherent in that approach, and I share their concerns about the inequity this language could create and the dangerous precedent it could set. What's more, VA previously estimated that the cost of expanding beneficiary travel to these, again, non-service connected veterans would be considerable at $2.4 million in the first year, $13.1 million over 5 years, and $29.8 million over 10 years. These costs are not offset in your amendment. Any other discussion on the amendment in the nature of a substitute?
Mr. Chairman, I hear what you're saying. This amendment is really important to me, and I would love it if we could sit down and try to work out our differences on this. And if you were willing to do this, I would, withdraw the amendment today, knowing that we could work on it in the future.
I will be glad to discuss the amendment. I think, though, that you're going to find that by setting that, I just don't know how we can give travel to somebody who becomes paralyzed in a non-service connected way, in an automobile accident or a diving accident, but I will be glad to work with you. I don't know if that satisfies your desire.
The problem simply is that the veteran can receive the services at these rehabilitation centers when it's, if it didn't occur while they were in the military. So they have the services, they're available. Some can travel by car, some can travel by train, but some have to fly because there's only these 13 facilities where they actually can receive these services and learn to live independently. And again, I think in the long run, balancing the costs are cheaper to fly them to these facilities to have the rehabilitation than not receiving the services that are already available to them.
So the question is, do you want to go ahead and withdraw, or would you like to take this to a vote?
Mr. Chairman.
No, let me ask the question of the sponsor first.
Well, I'm hoping that the chairman would work with me on it.
Oh, I've already said I'll be glad to talk with you about the issue, but I don't want to give you the false impression that I think that this is the way that we need to go.
Then I'll ask for a roll call vote.
Okay, Ms. Brown.
Mr. Chairman, I was hoping that before we ask for the roll call vote and have it to go down, that the gentlewoman would withdraw it at this time, and let's work on the possibilities, because I have visited one of these facilities and they do an excellent job, and I think some of the committee members went also. And so if there's underserved and we have veterans with the need, I think it's worth us talking about it between now and when we go to the floor. And I see some of the other members, Dr. Rowe shaking his head and others. We don't know the answer, but we do want to talk about it.
Don't we look?
I will follow the ranking member's recommendation and withdraw it, and I look forward to our conversations in
Thank
the
you very much,
future.
and we'll make sure
Mr.
that
Chairman.
Dr. Rowe is involved in the conversation.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Brown and Ms. Brownlee. The question now occurs on the adoption of the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by the ranking member, Ms. Brown. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
All those in favor, no. No. The nays have it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R.
Mr. Chairman, I need a roll call vote on this.
A recorded vote has been requested. The clerk shall call the roll.
On the amendment to the ANS to H.R. 4782, offered by Ranking Member Brown. Chairman Miller?
No.
Chairman Miller votes no. Mr. Lamborn? Mr. Lamborn votes no. Mr. Bilirakis? Dr. Rowe? Dr. Rowe votes no. Dr. Benishek? Dr. Benishek votes no. Mr. Huelskamp? Mr. Huelskamp votes no. Mr. Kaufman? Mr. Kaufman votes no. Dr. Wenstrup? Dr. Wenstrup votes no. Ms. Walorski? Ms. Walorski votes no. Dr. Abraham? Dr. Abraham votes no. Mr. Zeldin? Mr. Zeldin votes no. Mr. Costello? Mr. Costello votes no. Ms. Radewagen? Ms. Radewagen votes no. Mr. Boss? Mr. Boss votes no. Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Brown votes yes. Mr. Takano? Yes. Mr. Takano votes yes. Ms. Brownlee? Yes. Ms. Brownlee votes yes. Ms. Titus? Yes. Ms. Titus votes yes. Dr. Ruiz? Dr. Ruiz votes yes. Ms. Custer? Yes. Ms. Custer votes yes. Mr. O'Rourke? Mr. O'Rourke votes yes. Ms. Rice? Yes. Ms. Rice votes yes. Mr. Waltz? Yes. Mr. Waltz votes yes. Mr. McNerney?
Clerk shall report.
Mr. Chairman, 9 yes, 13 no, 2 non-voting.
The amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute is not agreed to, and since no other amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Dr. Abraham. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The amendment to in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4782 is agreed to. Is there any more discussion on the bill as amended? Since no other amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on the passage of H.R. 4782 as amended. All those in favor, aye. Aye. All opposed would say no. The ayes have it. H.R. 4782 as amended is agreed to. I now recognize Mr. Lamborn for a motion on reporting H.R. 4782 as amended.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we favorably forward H.R. 4782 as amended to the full committee.
All those in favor will say aye. 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 All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. H.R. 4782 as amended is reported favorably to the full House. I now call up H.R. 4087 as amended. The clerk shall report.
H.R. 4087 is amended to amend Title 38 United States Code to adjust the effective date of certain reductions and discontinuances of compensation, dependency, and indemnity compensation, and pension under the laws administered by the Secretary of Veterans Affairs.
The bill has been circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules, so without objection, first reading is dispensed with. The bill is now open to amendment at any point. I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute at the desk. The clerk shall report.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4087, offered by Mr. Miller of Florida.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment in the nature of a substitute be dispensed with. Hearing no objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that my amendment in the nature of a substitute be modified to indicate that the COLA round down in Section 2 be sunset on December 1st of 2026. Hearing no objection, so ordered. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes to speak in support of my amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4087 as amended. What this does is it incorporates the text of Congresswoman Love's legislation that would allow a family to retain benefits paid for the month of the veteran's death. As you may or may not be aware, current law requires most family members to return the last payment if the veteran dies before the end of the month. Under this proposal, the families would receive either DIC or compensation for that month, whichever payment is highest. Additionally, the amendment in the nature of a substitute also includes Ms. Brownlee's bill, H.R. 2975, the Protect Veterans from Financial Fraud Act. The provision of her bill would help protect vulnerable veterans from financial fraud by authorizing VA to reimburse veterans in VA's fiduciary program who are victims of fraud or misuse, regardless of the number of accounts that fiduciary handles. And finally, the amendment in the nature of a substitute contains my revised proposal, which would provide 2 payments of $10,000 each to veterans who suffered a traumatic injury to their creative organs during their military service. Veterans would qualify for these payments if they were eligible to receive benefits under the Service Members Group Life Insurance Traumatic Injury Protection Program, also known as T-SIGLI, or would have been eligible if T-SIGLI had been in place during their service. The intent of this benefit is to compensate veterans who cannot have a family naturally due to a traumatic injury suffered during their service. The funds would compensate these veterans for their injury and give them additional options to have children, including adoption or even becoming a foster parent. Under my proposal, each veteran would be able to choose the method that best suits his or her family's needs. Like all other veterans, there are no restrictions on how veterans can use the payment. However, I would hope that veterans do choose to use this benefit to find a way to parent children. Through their service, veterans have demonstrated their exceptional character and their value. I believe that no child could have better parents than the men and women who served our nation in uniform. I ask my colleagues to support this amendment in the nature of a substitute and would ask if any other members wish to comment on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. Who seeks recognition for the purposes of offering an amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4087.
The clerk shall report.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute, amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4087 offered by Ms. Brown of Florida.
I ask unanimous consent that the further reading of the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute be dispensed with, and hearing no objection so ordered. The gentlelady is now recognized for 5 minutes to speak on her amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4087 as amended.
Mr. Chairman, my amendment would strike the language providing for a permanent COLA cost of living adjustment, authorizing and would require that any increased provision under this be rounded down for 10 years. Although I know that many veterans groups support providing for a permanent COLA authorization, I believe that we as a committee should do our job and pass a COLA bill every year. We have done this so every year I've been here, and that's 24 years, and I believe we're all capable of continuing to do our jobs. My amendment would also strike the language mandating COLA round downs for 10 years. Again, like I've stated when I offered my amendment to H.R. 4782, I believe that we should not be cutting benefits for veterans in order to provide other benefits to other veterans. I realize that we have a tough job to do when we must meet pay-for requirements for veteran benefits. I believe that for benefits for our veterans, we should consider them as an ongoing cost of a war. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment and ensure that we do not cut the benefits of our veterans. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. I will not be supporting this amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute. And as the gentlelady knows, and we've talked about in this committee, the rules of the House require that all bills considered on the House floor must be paid for. If this amendment were to be adopted, it would mean that we would not be able to provide additional compensation to veterans who have suffered traumatic injuries to their creative organs. We would not be able to allow families of deceased veterans to retain their benefits paid for the month in which the veteran themselves died, and we would not be able to pay for provisions proposed by Ms. Brownlee, which would authorize VA to reimburse veterans if their fiduciary has misused or stolen their benefits, regardless of the number of accounts that fiduciary handles. I'm actually surprised that the gentlelady continues to raise this particular issue, because since 1993, when she first came to Congress, she has supported bills with the COLA round down at least 22 times. She has also supported the COLA round down on the House floor at least 32 times. And as I said, the current budget request from the President of the United States has a section, the round down of computation for the cost of living adjustment for service-connected compensation and dependency and indemnity compensation for 5 years. Whereas it says, and I just paraphrase, that this proposal reinstates the round down for 5 years, the cumulative effect of the round down for 5 years will total $2 billion in savings over 10 years. This is just for a budget savings. It doesn't even provide additional benefits to the veterans as this particular piece of legislation does. So I would urge my colleagues to continue the bipartisan tradition of using the COLA round down to pay for programs that would help improve services and benefits for our veterans. Ask if there's any further discussion on the amendment and the nature of a substitute that's offered by Ms. Brown.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question that I would like to ask the staff, because I'm confused. My understanding, we haven't done the round down since 2013. Permit, yes. It's one of the staffers we haven't done that, so this is a new tax. I'm confused. We have not, since 2013, we have not. Perhaps one of the staffers can answer my question.
I can answer the question. The
Yes,
fact
sir.
is, if you do put the marker down of 2013 and saying we haven't done the COLA round down since then, we could go back before that, and there's 20 years that are in there that the COLA round down was used, and you supported it during that time.
This is a permanent round down, Mr. Chairman, for 10 years. And that, to me, sounds like a tax.
No, I asked unanimous consent, and it was accepted that we have a sunset of 10 years.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
Is that
ma'am.
a tax for 10 years?
No, it's not a tax. It's not a tax. It's additional benefits that we're providing to our veterans, and it's something that, for some reason, has been supported in a bipartisan effort for years on this committee, and all of a sudden, it's being used as a political football. I would not count it as raising a tax, and the President himself has asked for it in his current budget request. Any other questions, members? Ms. Brownlee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Clerk shall report.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4087, offered by Ms. Brownlee of California.
And I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute be dispensed with. Hearing no objection, so ordered. The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes to speak in support of her amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4087 as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, I'd like to thank my colleague, Dr. Ruiz, for offering this amendment on my behalf at our subcommittee markup. I appreciate the support of my colleagues who voted for my amendment last week as well. As a mother, I know that there is no greater joy in life than having a family. The brave men and women who have served our country in uniform and been wounded in the line of duty deserve that same opportunity. We have a duty to help veterans like Army Corporal Corporal Tyler Wilson, who was recently profiled in a national newspaper in February. Corporal Wilson was 20 years old when he was hit by a bullet in Afghanistan, which pierced his spine and left him paralyzed below the waist. Doctors told Corporal Wilson and his fiancee that IVF was their only chance of having a child, but that they would have to cover the costs on their own. No veteran should have to pay out of pocket for a service-connected disability. Providing veterans who are unable to have a child naturally with $20,000 to pursue alternatives is certainly a step forward, but in my opinion, it is not enough. The average IVF cycle costs $12,500, and many couples need multiple IVF cycles to become pregnant. Under H.R. 4087, veterans who need more than one IVF cycle or need additional services like sperm extraction would not be covered. And for disabled women veterans who are unable to carry a child, H.R. 4087 would only cover about half the cost of a domestic adoption, which according to the Paralyzed Veterans of America's testimony can cost as much as $40,000. I am also deeply concerned that the bill would require veterans to apply for the special compensation under the bill through the Veterans Benefits Administration. We have held hearing after hearing about how this VA claims process is broken, yet the underlying bill would leave our veterans at the mercy of that dysfunctional claim system not once, but twice. Instead of putting a price tag on what we think the opportunity to have a family is worth, we should include IVF as part of the VA's medical benefits package so that our veterans get the complete care that they need. We should also ensure that the VA covers the cost of adoption for veterans who cannot have their own biological children. And we should ensure that the VA offers the same services that the Department of Defense provides so that service members who have been seriously injured can focus fully on their recoveries instead of worrying that Congress won't be there for them when or if they decide to start a family. My amendment would authorize the Secretary to provide disabled veterans with up to 3 cycles of IVF treatment, the same number as the Department of the Defense offers today. It would also allow the VA to cover the cost for up to 3 domestic adoptions. Mr. Chairman, my amendment is compromise language that was carefully negotiated and agreed by Senator Murray and Senator Isaacson. It is also nearly identical to H.R. 2257, a bill that you introduced last year. It's time to lift the VA prohibition on IVF, a ban that the American Society for Reproductive Medicine has called antiquated and unconscionable. It's time to do the right thing for our veterans like Corporal Wilson, who are struggling to start a family and running out of time. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment. Paralyzed Veterans of America supports the amendment, and I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brownlee. I will be opposing your amendment, and I can assure you that I am completely committed to attempting to adequately compensate service members for injuries that they have incurred in their service to our nation, particularly those who have received an injury that would result in their inability to conceive or carry a child. I was adopted. My birth mother gave me up for adoption, and I was very blessed to have been adopted by the 2 greatest parents that you could have ever asked for. I am trying to find a way to better support those who have experienced these uniquely devastating injuries. I've been in close consultation with all of the stakeholders, including those who are advocating for in vitro fertilization and those who are opposed to IVF treatments, and the result of those conversations are reflected in the bill before us. The language in the underlying bill has, in my opinion, the best chance of passing the House and the Senate. And I would remind you that the Murray language is not in the Senate omnibus bill that was filed over on the other side of the Capitol building, but to provide financial assistance to injured veterans who've experienced traumatic injuries that prevent them from having children naturally. Under my proposal, eligible veterans would receive $20,000 to use as they wish. If the veterans want to use those funds to pursue adoption or other means to starting a family, they're free to do that. It preserves the veteran's choice while more adequately compensating for injuries that we all know carry uniquely devastating impact. I know the gentlelady does share a commitment to helping veterans who are unable to have a family naturally as a result of their military service. However, I would say that her amendment would jeopardize the chance of providing any assistance to these veterans at this point. Would ask if there's any other discussion on the amendment and the nature of the substitute.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Costello.
As I look at the amendment, number one, I believe that this is a compensation bill that you've provided, which provides flexibility so that those who do wish to utilize the IVF treatment are able to do it. The other added observation that I would make is that there are assisted reproductive technologies beyond IVF, and so there's at least from my perspective, the concern that it could be limiting, in the sense that if you're saying that only IVF would be permitted when utilizing this two lump sum $10,000 payments, then those other assistive reproductive technologies which are recognized and which are utilized would somehow not be able to be utilized, because in effect you're able to do this right now already. And you're looking, I guess, for the Secretary to specifically acknowledge this and sanction this, even though it's already being utilized. Do you understand what I'm saying, what my concern may be? And then I would also share the chairman's concern in the sense that if for some reason this were to get to the floor and it's voted down because of this, because of IVF, which I don't have, I'm supportive of it, I would hate to see that happen as well. So I'll yield back.
If the gentleman would yield.
I'll yield my time to you.
Thank you for your comments, and I would be happy to, work with you if there are other evidence-based strategies for families. Certainly, I don't want to limit evidence-based options, that's for sure. My concern is I think the bill and Mr. Miller's amendment, Chairman Miller's amendment, is really a step in the right direction. I just don't think it's enough, and I think it's clear that the treatments out there and or the adoptions that are out there are going to cost more, and I just strongly feel like it may not cost more in some states, and other states it's going to cost more. And it was stated and testified over and over again that the average cost of an adoption is around $40,000, and I have a friend and a colleague who's pursuing that right now, and that's generally the cost associated with it. So I just want to make sure that our veterans are fully covered if they need these services, and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. O'Rourke.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to speak in support of Ms. Brownlee's amendment, and I'd like to ask the committee to decide what the right thing to do is and then pursue it. If we want to offer every opportunity to that veteran so that they can have a family of their own, then we should do it, and then we should try to shape the politics so that we can make it happen. When we sent that service member overseas to put their lives on the line, we didn't quibble over how much that was going to cost, whether it was going to be $500 billion, $1 trillion, or more. We were going to pay any price to pursue our objectives, and I think we have that same responsibility upon that service member's return in their transition into life as a veteran to support them to our fullest ability. And I think that the small difference from $20,000 as you propose to $36,000 in IVF treatments, or our support in adoptions for that service member and their family is not too much to ask. And I would just add, on a personal note, I have, in the 3.5 years that I've been on this committee, been very grateful for your leadership, been very impressed with the way that you have brought this committee together, minority and majority, on tough issues. And I think you sell your leadership short because I believe were you to bring Ms. Brownlee's amendment in this bill to the floor, your moral authority, your leadership, the respect that you command from our colleagues on the floor on issues important to veterans would allow us to pass this, to do the right thing. And I think it'd be a victory for the committee and a victory for the veterans that we represent. So I hope you and the majority will consider voting yes on Ms. Brownlee's amendment.
A question to you, Mr. O'Rourke. So if we raise the number from 20 to 36,000 on the base amendment, that would satisfy your questions?
Here's what I would like to do. I would like there to be no limit in our ability to assist these former service members in starting a family. However, I think Ms. Brownlee's amendment, as currently worded, gets us to a defensible level, one that I can support and be able to explain to the veterans that I represent. So I want to make sure that I'm clear with you that I'm supporting her amendment as currently worded. But in that one difference in terms of the IVF payments, I think that's an important distinction.
Even Ms. Brownlee's amendment, though, has a limit. I mean, we talk about unlimited dollars. There is a limit. Ms. Murray's bill over on the Senate side has a limit to it as well. Again, we are trying to move it forward, and you know, I believe that the bill that I have put forth, the amendment that I have put forth, is the best way to move the ball forward. And I think the most important thing that we probably should do at this point is to go ahead and vote, but continue the process of dialogue as we all have. And I will be glad to, as I have spoken with the folks from the PVA and many of the individuals who have had catastrophic injuries to creative organs, but also the other stakeholders as well, that we have an opportunity. I'll be glad to host a roundtable in here to discuss it, but I think we do need to go ahead and move this piece of legislation forward. So I would say that, Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to add that I'm probably the only person on this committee with some institutional memory and realize that the problem started with this committee. And I want to thank you for moving us forward, because we are the ones that stop people from being able to do certain kinds of adoption and certain kinds of treatment. It was this committee, and I was here at the time, and I want to appreciate how you're moving us forward. And I support her amendment, and I support us trying to work out the differences between here and the floor.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. Since no other amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on the adoption.
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Brownlee.
With all due respect to you and your leadership, this is, I think, very important to me and important to many members of the committee, and as a consequence, I would request a recorded vote.
Very good. Clerk will call the roll.
On the amendment, to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4087 as amended, offered by Ms. Brownlee. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman votes no. Mr. Lamborn? Mr. Lamborn votes no. Mr. Bilirakis? Mr. Bilirakis votes no. Dr. Rowe? Dr. Rowe votes no. Dr. Benishek? Dr. Benishek votes no. Mr. Yuleskamp? Mr. Yuleskamp votes no. Mr. Kaufman? Mr. Kaufman votes yes. Dr. Wenstrup? Dr. Wenstrup votes no. Ms. Walorski? Ms. Walorski votes no. Dr. Abraham? Dr. Abraham votes no. Mr. Zeldin? Mr. Zeldin votes no. Mr. Costello? Mr. Costello votes no. Ms. Radewagen? Ms. Radewagen votes no. Mr. Boss? Mr. Boss votes no. Ms. Brown? Ms. Brown votes yes. Mr. Takano? Mr. Takano votes yes. Ms. Brownlee? Ms. Brownlee votes yes. Ms. Titus? Ms. Titus votes yes. Dr. Ruiz? Dr. Ruiz votes yes. Ms. Custer? Mr. O'Rourke? Mr. O'Rourke votes yes. Ms. Rice? Ms. Rice votes yes. Mr. Waltz? Mr. Waltz votes yes. Mr. McNerney?
Clerk shall report.
Mr. Chairman, 9 yes, 13 noes, with 2 non-voting.
The amendment to the amendment in the nature of substitute is not agreed to. The question now occurs on the adoption of the amendment to the amendment in the nature of substitute offered by the Ranking Member Brown. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. No. The noes have it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am.
I need a roll call vote.
Recorded vote has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
On the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4087 as amended, offered by Ranking Member Brown. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman votes no. Mr. Lamborn? Mr. Lamborn votes no. Mr. Bilirakis? Mr. Bilirakis votes no. Dr. Rowe? Dr. Rowe votes no. Dr. Benishek? Dr. Benishek votes no. Mr. Huelskamp? Mr. Huelskamp votes no. Mr. Kaufman? Mr. Kaufman votes no. Dr. Winstrup? Dr. Winstrup votes no. Ms. Walorski? Ms. Walorski votes no. Dr. Abraham? Dr. Abraham votes no. Mr. Zeldin? Mr. Zeldin votes no. Mr. Costello? Mr. Costello votes no. Ms. Radewagen? Ms. Radewagen votes no. Mr. Boss? Mr. Boss votes no. Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Brown votes yes. Mr. Takano? Mr. Takano votes yes. Ms. Brownlee? Ms. Brownlee votes yes. Ms. Titus? Ms. Titus votes yes. Dr. Ruiz? Dr. Ruiz votes yes. Ms. Custer? Mr. O'Rourke? Mr. O'Rourke votes yes. Ms. Rice? Ms. Rice votes yes. Mr. Waltz? Mr. Waltz votes yes. Mr. McNerney?
Clerk shall report.
Mr. Chairman, the vote is 8 yes, 14 noes, 2 non-voting.
So the amendment to the amendment in the nature of substitute is not agreed to, and since no other amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4087 is agreed to.
Recorded vote, Mr. Chairman.
Recorded vote's been called for. All those, the clerk will call.
The roll on the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4087 as amended. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman votes aye. Mr. Lamborn? Mr. Lamborn votes aye. Mr. Bilirakis? Mr. Bilirakis votes aye. Dr. Rowe? Dr. Rowe votes aye. Dr. Benishek? Dr. Benishek votes aye. Mr. Huelskamp? Mr. Huelskamp votes aye. Mr. Kaufman? Mr. Kaufman votes aye. Dr. Winstrup? Dr. Winstrup votes aye. Ms. Walorski? Ms. Walorski votes aye. Dr. Abraham? Dr. Abraham votes aye. Mr. Zeldin? Mr. Zeldin votes aye. Mr. Costello? Mr. Costello votes aye. Ms. Radewagen? Ms. Radewagen votes aye. Mr. Boss? Mr. Boss votes yes. Ms. Brown? Ms. Brown votes no. Mr. Takano? Mr. Takano votes no. Ms. Brownlee? Ms. Brownlee votes no. Ms. Titus? Ms. Titus votes no. Dr. Ruiz? Dr. Ruiz votes no. Ms. Custer? Mr. O'Rourke? Mr. O'Rourke votes no. Ms. Rice? Ms. Rice votes no. Mr. Walsh? No. Mr. Walsh votes no. Mr. McNerney? Mr. Chairman, the vote is 14 yes, 18 noes, 2 non-voting. Excuse me, 8 noes, 2 non-voting.
So the amendment in the nature of substitute to H.R. 4087 is agreed to. Is there any more discussion on the bill as amended? Since no amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on the passage of H.R. 4087 as amended. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. H.R., in fact, let's do a roll call vote.
H.R. 4087 as amended.
As amended.
On passage.
Yes.
Chairman Miller.
Aye.
Chairman Miller votes aye. Mr. Lamborn. Mr. Lamborn votes aye. Mr. Bilirakis. Mr. Bilirakis votes aye. Dr. Rowe. Dr. Rowe votes aye. Dr. Benishek. Dr. Benishek votes aye. Mr. Huelskamp. Mr. Huelskamp votes aye. Mr. Kaufman. Mr. Kaufman votes aye. Dr. Wenstrup. Dr. Wenstrup votes aye. Ms. Walorski. Ms. Walorski votes aye. Dr. Abraham. Dr. Abraham votes aye. Mr. Zeldin. Mr. Zeldin votes aye. Mr. Costello. Mr. Costello votes yes. Ms. Radewagen. Ms. Radewagen votes aye. Mr. Bost. Mr. Bost votes yes. Ms. Brown. Ms. Brown votes no. Mr. Takano. Mr. Takano votes no. Ms. Brownlee. Ms. Brownlee votes no. Ms. Titus. Ms. Titus votes no. Dr. Ruiz. Dr. Ruiz votes no. Ms. Custer. Mr. O'Rourke. Mr. O'Rourke votes no. Ms. Rice. Ms. Rice votes no. Mr. Waltz. Mr. Waltz votes no. Mr. McNerney. Mr. Chairman, the vote is 14 yes, 8 noes, 2 non-voting.
So the ayes have it. H.R. 4087 as amended is agreed to. Now I recognize Mr. Lamborn for a motion on reporting H.R. 4087 as amended.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we favorably report H.R. 4087 as amended to the full committee.
All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. H.R. 4087 as amended is reported favorably to the full House. I now ask unanimous consent to consider the following bills on block: H.R. 2460, H.R. 3715 as amended, and H.R. 3989 as amended. Hearing no objection, so ordered. The clerk shall report.
H.R. 2460 to amend Title 38 United States Code to improve the provision of adult day health care services for veterans.
The bills were circulated in advance pursuant to our committee rules. I ask that reading of the bills be dispensed with. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Is there any other discussion on the bills remaining on the agenda?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 3715 as amended is of great importance to many families who traditionally hold funerals on weekends. While they have the authority to provide weekend services to veterans and their families, they rarely do. This has been a particularly challenging for various religions and cultures who hold service burial their loved ones on Saturdays. For those families, not only being able to bury loved ones on Saturday means that they have to hold a service on Saturdays and then revisit the pain of losing a loved one by burying them later in the week. Furthermore, the families are forced to bear the cost of storing their loved ones over the weekend, while adds to an additional insult to their loss. This bill, as amended, make weekend burials available to all veterans regardless of their reasoning and need for weekend burials. This benefit for this veteran is to honor their service to their country. Their loved ones should have the opportunity to mourn their loss at a time that works for them. Thank you for your consideration and support of this common sense change. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. Any other comments? Since no amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on the remaining agenda items. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. I now recognize the ranking member, Ms. Brown, for a motion on forwarding our remaining agenda items to the full committee.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 2460, H.R. 3989 as amended, and H.R. 3715 as amended be reported favorably to the full House of Representatives.
All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. H.R. 2460, H.R. 3715 as amended, H.R. 3989 as amended are reported favorably to the full House. Real quickly, summarizing today's votes, the committee has voted to report favorably to the full House H.R. 5178 as amended, H.R. 4138, H.R. 5229 as amended, H.R. 3286 as amended, H.R. 3471 as amended, H.R. 3974 as amended, H.R. 3956 as amended, H.R. 4782 as amended, H.R. 4087 as amended, H.R. 2460, H.R. 3715 as amended, and H.R. 3989 as amended. And I would ask unanimous consent that the committee staff be authorized to make technical, clerical, and conforming changes to today's bills that have been reported favorably. Hearing no objections, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that all members would have 5 legislative days with it to revise and extend their remarks or add any extraneous remarks of the bills reported favorably today. Hearing no objections, so ordered. Thank you, everybody, for being here. This committee markup is adjourned.